Imagine being a police officer, having drinks with your friend at a local bar. You laugh together, share stories about your day, and trust him completely. Now imagine discovering that this friend, the man you've known for months, has been killing young women and keeping their severed heads in his apartment the entire time you've known him. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Edmund Kemper, a man so intelligent, so charming, and so utterly monstrous that he managed to hide in plain sight while committing some of the most disturbing murders in American history.
Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California, weighing an astonishing 13 pounds. From the moment he entered this world, Edmund Kemper was different. By the time he reached adulthood, he stood at 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighed over 300 pounds. He was a giant, an imposing figure that could dominate any room simply by walking into it. But his physical size wasn't what made him truly dangerous. Edmund Kemper had an IQ of 145, putting him in the genius category, higher than 99% of the population.
But before we understand the monster, we need to understand the child. Edmund's early years were marked by severe dysfunction. His parents divorced when he was young, and he was raised primarily by his mother, Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper. By all accounts, Clarnell was an alcoholic and deeply abusive woman. She would lock young Edmund in a dark basement at night, telling him she feared he would molest his sisters. She berated him constantly, emasculated him, and created an environment of psychological torture that would shape every action he would take later in life. Edmund himself would later say that every woman he killed was a surrogate for his mother, practice runs for the murder he truly wanted to commit.
Even as a child, Edmund displayed disturbing behaviors. He played macabre games with his sisters called gas chamber and electric chair, where he would act out execution scenarios. He tortured and killed the family's cats, burying one alive and cutting another into pieces with a machete. When his mother asked why he killed the cat, he told her it showed more affection to his sister than to him. These weren't childish pranks. These were rehearsals, early manifestations of a mind that was already fantasizing about death and control.
At age 14, Edmund ran away from his mother's house in search of his father in Van Nuys, California. But his father rejected him, sending him instead to live with his paternal grandparents on their remote ranch in North Fork, California. His grandmother Maud, like his mother, was controlling and critical. The resentment built day by day until August 27, 1964. Edmund was 15 years old. That morning, after an argument with his grandmother, Edmund Kemper took a rifle, walked up behind her as she sat at the kitchen table, and shot her in the back of the head. He then fired 2 more shots into her back and stabbed her repeatedly with a kitchen knife. When his grandfather returned from grocery shopping, Edmund shot him dead in the driveway before he could even get out of the car. When police asked Edmund why he killed his grandparents, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. "I just wondered," he said, "how it would feel to shoot Grandma." He added that he killed his grandfather so he wouldn't have to see his dead wife.
Edmund was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and sent to Atascadero State Hospital for the criminally insane. But here's where the system failed catastrophically. During his time at Atascadero, Edmund worked in the psychology lab, administering tests to other patients. He memorized the tests, learned exactly what answers would make him appear rehabilitated, and played the system perfectly. The doctors were impressed by his intelligence, his cooperation, his apparent progress. They saw a troubled boy who had been reformed. What they didn't see was a predator who had just learned how to hide better.
On his 21st birthday, December 18, 1969, Edmund Kemper was released. His juvenile record was sealed. Psychiatrists deemed him no longer a danger to society, and they released him into the custody of the one person he hated most in the world, his mother, Clarnell. She was now working at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Young female college students surrounded them everywhere. Edmund's fantasies, which had never stopped, now had a target-rich environment. The stage was set for horror.
For 2 years after his release, Edmund appeared to be living a normal life. He took various jobs, got into a motorcycle accident that left him with a $15,000 settlement, and bought a car with the money, a 1969 Ford Galaxy. But inside, the compulsion was building. He began cruising the highways around Santa Cruz, picking up young female hitchhikers, then letting them go unharmed. He picked up approximately 150 women this way, training himself, desensitizing himself to the act, waiting until he felt ready. He called these urges his little zapples.
On May 7, 1972, Edmund picked up two 18-year-old students from Fresno State University, Marianne Pesce and Anita Mary Lucchesa. They were hitchhiking to visit friends at Stanford. Edmund drove them to a secluded wooded area he knew from his work with the highway department. He handcuffed Pesce, locked Lucchesa in the trunk, then stabbed and strangled Pesce to death. He killed Lucchesa the same way. Edmund later confessed that while handcuffing Pesce, he accidentally brushed the back of his hand against her breast, and it excited him, confirming what he had suspected, that he derived sexual pleasure from their fear and helplessness.
He took their bodies back to his apartment and did the unthinkable. He decapitated both women, photographed their nude corpses, dismembered them, and engaged in sexual acts with their severed heads. He later disposed of the remains in different locations across the mountains. The horror of what Edmund did to these young women cannot be overstated, but what makes it even more disturbing is how methodical he was, how calm, how completely in control of every action.
Between May 1972 and February 1973, Edmund Kemper killed 5 more young women. 15-year-old Aiko Koo, who missed her bus to dance class and made the fatal decision to hitchhike. 18-year-old Cindy Shaw, whose remains were scattered across Eden Canyon. 19-year-old Rosalind Thorpe and 21-year-old Alice Liu, college students who accepted a ride together. Each murder followed the same horrifying pattern: abduction, strangulation, sexual assault of the corpse, decapitation, dismemberment, necrophilia with the severed heads, disposal of remains, and a return to his normal life as if nothing had happened.
Edmund kept trophies, photographs of his victims, recordings he made of their final moments. He would later admit to consuming flesh from the legs of some victims, though he retracted this statement. In one particularly disturbing incident, after killing 15-year-old Aiko Koo, Edmund placed her severed head in the trunk of his car and drove to a scheduled psychiatric appointment. The doctor who examined him that day deemed him no longer a threat to society and recommended his juvenile record be permanently sealed. All the while, a teenage girl's head was in the trunk of the car parked outside.
What makes Edmund Kemper particularly fascinating and terrifying to criminal psychologists is his self-awareness. He understood his compulsions, could articulate them clearly, and yet couldn't or wouldn't stop them. He later told FBI profiler John Douglas that when he saw an attractive woman, part of him wondered what it would be like to take her on a date, while another part wondered how her head would look on a stick. This duality, this complete disconnect between his intellect and his morality, is what makes him such a compelling case study in criminal psychology. Here's where Edmund Kemper's story becomes almost unbelievable. During the entire time he was committing these murders, he was befriending local police officers. He would hang out at a bar called the Jury Room, a popular spot for Santa Cruz law enforcement. The officers liked him, they called him Big Ed. They shared details of their investigations with him, including details about the co-ed killer case, never knowing they were sitting across from the murderer himself. Edmund would listen intently, learn what the police knew, what evidence they had, what they were looking for, and he would use this information to stay one step ahead.
His intelligence, his size that made him seem non-threatening rather than dangerous, his calm demeanor, all combined to create the perfect camouflage. Young women would accept rides from him because he looked safe, like someone's friendly uncle. Police would share information with him because he seemed genuinely interested in law enforcement. He had even applied to become a state trooper, but was rejected for being too tall. Everyone saw what Edmund wanted them to see, a gentle giant with a high IQ who wouldn't hurt a fly.
By early 1973, Edmund had killed 6 young women, but he hadn't achieved what he truly wanted. All of these murders were practice, rehearsals for his ultimate target. On Easter weekend, April 20th, 1973, while his mother, Clarnell, slept, Edmund entered her bedroom with a claw hammer. He bludgeoned her skull, then used a knife to cut her throat and decapitate her. But he didn't stop there. In perhaps the most disturbing act of his entire killing spree, Edmund engaged in sexual acts with his mother's severed head. He also removed her larynx, the voice box that had screamed at him his entire childhood, and threw it down the garbage disposal. He later said that it was fitting that the disposal jammed and spit it back out because, as he put it, she'd been screaming at him for years and even after death it wouldn't go down.
By early 1973, Edmund had killed 6 young women, but he hadn't achieved what he truly wanted. All of these murders were practice, rehearsals for his ultimate target. On Easter weekend, April 20th, 1973, while his mother Clarnell slept, Edmund entered her bedroom with a claw hammer. He bludgeoned her skull, then used a knife to cut her throat and decapitate her. But he didn't stop there. In perhaps the most disturbing act of his entire killing spree, Edmund engaged in sexual acts with his mother's severed head. He also removed her larynx, the voice box that had screamed at him his entire childhood, and threw it down the garbage disposal. He later said that it was fitting that the disposal jammed and spit it back out because, as he put it, she'd been screaming at him for years and even after death it wouldn't go down.
When police arrived to arrest him, Edmund didn't resist. He calmly got into the police car. When asked why he turned himself in, he gave various explanations. Some say he was simply done, that killing his mother had completed his mission. Others believe his ego demanded recognition for his intelligence and the perfect crimes he'd committed. Edmund himself said he wanted to be stopped before he killed again, though whether we can believe anything a psychopath says is questionable.
Edmund Kemper's trial began in October 1973. His defense attorneys attempted to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but Edmund himself rejected this defense. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists examined him and all found him legally sane. They determined that Edmund was fully aware of his actions, understood they were wrong, and chose to do them anyway. He was not suffering from delusions or hallucinations. He was a sexual sadist with complete control over his faculties, making him legally responsible for his crimes. Edmund Kemper was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder and requested the death penalty for his crimes. He wanted death. He said it was what he deserved. But California had suspended capital punishment at the time, so instead he received 8 consecutive life sentences. He was sent to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, where he remains to this day, now 76 years old. What makes Edmund Kemper unique among serial killers is his willingness to discuss his crimes in detail. He has granted extensive interviews to FBI profilers, helping to create the modern field of criminal profiling. He worked with agents like John Douglas and Robert Ressler, providing insights into the mind of a serial killer that helped law enforcement understand and catch other predators. His interviews formed part of the foundation for the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Netflix's series Mindhunter features Kemper prominently, and actor Cameron Britton's portrayal captures his unsettling combination of intelligence and monstrosity.
Edmund Kemper has been denied parole multiple times, most recently in 2024, and he is never expected to be released. In his interviews, he comes across as articulate, self-aware, even likable at moments, which makes him all the more disturbing. He can explain in detail why he did what he did, the psychology behind his actions, the progression of his fantasies into reality. He shows no remorse, only intellectual understanding. It's as if he's discussing someone else's crimes, not his own.
The case of Edmund Kemper forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about evil, about nature versus nurture, about the limits of rehabilitation and the fallibility of psychiatric evaluation. Was he born a monster or made into one by his mother's abuse? Could he have been stopped if doctors had seen the warning signs? How did someone so obviously dangerous fool so many intelligent people for so long? These questions have no easy answers.
What we do know is that 10 people died because of Edmund Kemper. His grandparents, Edmund and Maud Kemper. 6 young women with their entire lives ahead of them. Marianne Pesce, Anita Mary Lucchesa, Aiko Koo, Cindy Schall, Rosalind Thorpe, and Alice Liu. His mother, Clarnell, and her friend, Sarah Hallett. These weren't just statistics. They were daughters, friends, students with dreams and futures that were stolen by one man's sick compulsions.
Edmund Kemper's story isn't just about one serial killer. It's about the darkness that can hide behind intelligence and charm, about the importance of believing warning signs even when they come from seemingly normal people, and about the lasting trauma inflicted not just on victims, but on their families, friends, and communities. Santa Cruz in the early 1970s became known as the murder capital of the world because 3 separate serial killers were operating there simultaneously. But of all of them, Edmund Kemper remains the most studied, the most interviewed, and perhaps the most chilling because he could be anyone. He could be your friend at the bar, your helpful neighbor, the polite giant who helps you change a tire.